Welcome, everybody. I'm Chris Crowe.
I'm Chris Cohen.
We're both advanced Cicerones and beer scholars, and we're here comparing Weissbier and Weizenbock today, and also just maybe speaking more broadly about German wheat beer in general.
Right. Because these styles are very similar and very much related. And so the big kind of general Weissbier, German Weissbier primer, I suppose, is that, you know, these beers are, of course, made with something like 50-ish% wheat, generally. And the big standout, like flavor and aroma that you're going to get from both of these is that yeast, that special German Weissbier yeast character, which is the clove and banana, right? That's the instant giveaway for one of these kinds of beers. You know, if you're doing a blind tasting and you're asked, like, is this a German or an American hef? It's like, boom, does it have the banana and clove? If yes, German. If no, American. In this case, these are both German, so they both have that character in a big way, actually. So if you are faced with these two styles, you know, how do you tell them apart in a blind situation? The real big difference here is just alcohol content.
It really is, right? They're going to have very similar flavor and aroma.
Right.
You just have to do practice sessions like this where you can try to determine the character of the body of the beer.
Right. Density of body, that little alcohol, kind of, you know, it has a little bit of a perfumey aroma, but it'll also warm your throat a little bit. It has a mouthfeel element to it. One thing that's super interesting about these particular commercial examples, which are both BJCP listed commercial examples of the classic variety, is the color. Okay, so when you hear, you know, bock, you think, oh, it's probably going to be a little dark.
Yeah, you're just primed to think dark.
And this one is darker than this one. Do you think that's the Weizenbock?
You might, just based on assumptions about what a stronger beer is.
Yeah, well, you would be wrong.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting comparison. I think most Weizenbocks would tend to be a little darker than your average Hefe-Weizen, but in this case, the Weihenstephaner Vitus is actually paler than the Paulaner Hefe-Weizen. So that's kind of wacky. That's why we picked these ones.
That's why we picked them, and you have to undo a little bit of the psychological influence that you may have related to the color of beers.
Yep.
You know, Weizenbock can be as dark as, I think, 25 SRM, but you get this super pale one, and this looks like it might be quite refreshing. You know, it's like pale.
And it is.
It doesn't look, you know, we're trying to undo the assumption that dark means heavy.
Right.
Light means light, you know, pale means light. It's not always true.
My favorite for that is Schwarzbier, but that's a different show.
True.
So, okay, in this case, you've got these two beers that look pretty dang similar. You're never going to be able to tell these apart visually in like a blind tasting, that's for sure. And so the only way you're going to be able to tell these apart is really by the density, the viscosity, the mouthfeel, and that alcohol presence.
Yeah, and since these two are from different producers, sure, there are like some slight differences in the concentration of, you know, that banana character versus the clove character in the other one, etc.
Yep.
But it's when you take a sip that the Paulaner, to me, you know, it is a shade darker. It does have a lightly toasty, nutty thing.
Yeah.
But it's very light, refreshing, bubbly. You know, it's sort of like a light, ripe banana.
Yep.
Really pleasant dusting of clove.
Yep.
Whereas if you take a sip of the Weizenbock, that's when everything snaps into focus, I think.
Right. It just hits you. It's punchier and all on all fronts. You know,
It's creamier. It's denser.
Yep.
It's breadier. Just everything is kind of cranked to 11.
One thing we noticed, which is really interesting, is the Hefe-Weizen being even just this tiny shade or two darker, actually does have just a touch of like a bread crust malt character that is missing in the Weizenbock, which is tricky because you would think the Weizenbock would be a little darker and might be the beer that would have that characteristic.
Yep. And one other trick to avoid. It's not a trick, it's a trap. This is, people think all German style wheat beer is super cloudy too.
Right.
And you don't know how long it's been sitting on a shelf. You don't know how much has fallen out of suspension.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a relatively, what we're looking at is a relatively clear
and I can see
wheat beer.
I can see just looking through this bottle that the bottom section is quite a bit cloudier than the top, and we didn't swirl this before we poured it. That could happen to you in a blind tasting.
Yeah. So keep in mind that you may be practicing with different commercial examples, but if you're comparing Weissbier to Weizenbock, those are the two main takeaways. Weizenbock is going to have a much bigger body that manifests as creamy, denser, bready.
Yep.
And then you may get some of that perfumey, warming alcohol character that helps you know that it's a stronger beer.
Yep. And that's it. That's the only way you're going to tell these apart. If you do practice a bunch, I do think these are different enough that it will be very much mostly obvious. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little too confident.
But that's the thing, right? We all have our super easy ones and the ones we struggle with, and we're doing these exercises to help prove that it's practice. Yeah. None of this is natural. If you sit down with these a couple of times, you're going to get it.
Yeah, you're never gonna sit down and take a whiff of a Hefe-Weizen, a Weissbier, and smell alcohol. That's never gonna happen. But with the Weizenbock, it's absolutely apparent. And that's how you tell them apart.
Cheers to that.
Yeah. Cheers, man. Boop. Good luck.